Welcome back, everyone. We are moving on to our next topic here on this episode of The Deep Dive, and that is going to be 10 years old is too young to own a mobile phone. Very interesting, because obviously this now can almost feed into the previous topic of internet access, and I talked about how I need it for my phone all the time. But then I'm wondering if there is an age limit as to how early someone should own such a device, and what would they be using and doing with that device at the age of 10. Because I'm going to think back to when I was 10, and I was playing with rocks. I didn't know what a cell phone was. I don't think cell phones even existed when I was a child at the age of 10.
Did you at least have fancy rocks, though, or just like your average run-of-the-mill rocks?
Average run-of-the-mill rocks that came out of the backyard.
Not even fancy ones.
No. So I didn't even have a phone. I'll tell you that the first thing I got, which was really cool, I think when I was 18, going away. No, I was probably 16. My mother wanted to keep track of me, so she bought me a pager.
Oh, I thought you were going to say a leash.
Well, if she could, she probably would have as well. But she gave me a pager as like a gift one day, and I'm thinking, what is this? It's so I can get a hold of you all the time. So I had a pager. I mean, you couldn't obviously call from it, but it was like cool. I felt like a doctor, right? Ooh, beep, beep, beep,
Absolutely.
beep, beep. And she would text me with her number with 911 like it was urgent. She'd, where are you? And then we just to see where I was. Curfew was 10 o'clock. But a phone. 10.
Yeah, so I'm going to be honest. This is something that I've thought a great deal about. I've had conversations with friends of mine that have kids, and I know how the current landscape regarding, kind of the expected extracurriculars of children, and a lot of them, it's kind of difficult to expect that they aren't going to want to be on their phone or on their computer doing things. And I've also done a great deal of research for a project I was working on about, what actually phones do to people, right? And what social media does to people. And I was not looking forward to talking about this topic. I'm not going to lie.
Really?
I was not looking forward to it because this is a topic that, from my experience, rightfully so, parents especially are very sensitive to. And that's because, if not at 10, very shortly thereafter, like probably 12, maybe 14 even, the vast majority of children have mobile phones. Now,
by high school, I would assume.
Yes.
So my nephew, the limit for my sister was when you go to high school, which is grade 9, then you can get a phone at that time, which is fine because by then you are a teenager.
Sure.
And I think now it's different. Like, I mean, we had teenager pagers back when I was a teenager.
Yeah.
And so now the thing is, you're a teenager, you get a cell phone.
Yeah, I mean, in part of the thing about a cell phone is it's kind of funny because it's usually discussed in a manner that's completely tone deaf to what it is, right? A mobile phone is not a mobile phone. It's a supercomputer that can make calls, right? That's
basically
what it is.
Supercomputer in your pocket.
It is. It's a supercomputer in your pocket. And it does everything.
That's why they call them smartphones.
Well, absolutely. They do everything. But
Smarter than me, bro.
You love how they still keep the word phone in there, right? Which is, it's actually a misnomer. It should actually be surveillance system that watches everything you do and everything you put on it, and also tracks information and sells it to people and then uses that to exploit your vulnerabilities.
Well, that wouldn't really sell. That's such a long title, and it's so out of the X-Files.
Exactly,
right? Can I please buy that item that likes to surveillance me and sell my...
Totally, right?
You mean a phone?
Yeah, exactly, right? And I mean, so I totally understand that no parent wants to be the one that has the kid that is agonizingly begging for a mobile phone because everyone else has one. I understand that. That's like an impossible position to be in, because by the same token, kids are doing far fewer extracurriculars compared to when we were younger. We
playing
were
rocks
all the time,
right?
A lot of the activities that children do now are largely indoors, or they use the internet in some way. And that might just be a sign of the times. It's not a criticism that I'm making, but is that necessarily good for kids, right? Like, are we going to feel compelled as parents to get them it because we don't want them to be the only one without some sort of mobile phone that likely is exploiting their vulnerabilities and mental health in some way? Like, do you want to have the only kid who doesn't have that? It's kind of like, well, kind of do. I don't want to break my kid inadvertently, but then by the same token, it's like, okay, but am I going to break them by not having them have it? And it's like, I don't know the answer to that. Like, so that's why I do not want to talk about this, right? But by the same token, it's very telling. So what I like to do is I like to look to people who make decisions or who invent things and see what they do with them, right? And so, Steve Jobs, very famously, right? If you had paid attention to different interviews that he had done, they asked, right? They said, and I don't really care about Steve Jobs either way, right? But he said, he was asked by a reporter, do your kids have smartphones? And at the time, they were 12 and 14. And he held up the phone and he said, "There's no way they do, because I make these and I know what they do."
Get
And
out of
that's
here.
what he said. And he's not the only big, let's say Silicon Valley, type of either software engineer or tech designer that has said that. The device itself is deliberately designed to addict you to it so that you engage with it in some way. And there's been documentaries made about it.
Oh, I know. I saw a really
yeah.
good one actually on Netflix.
Yeah, there are, right?
I
And
did.
there's lots, and that's how they're designed. And so in reality, what you're doing when you purchase a mobile phone for anybody, right? Really, we're just talking about what the age cutoff should be, right?
Right.
You're essentially inviting someone to become addicted to something that in some way will more than likely be used for social media, because we're hyper-social animals and like the attention we get, and also like to act as a voyeur on other people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
And we get these false misrepresentations of exactly what people's lives look like, because you only see the parts that they volunteer, right?
Of course, the good parts, and like the
exactly.
really good polished pictures that have filters on them. Like, I'm a cat.
Totally, right? But it's just one of those things where it's like, expect that it will offer you convenience, and it will offer you connectivity, and it will take a toll on your mental and probably your physical health and your ability to socialize properly. So really, as adults, we take that toll too. I'm not saying we don't. But
of course, it
to,
totally can affect even adult mental health, because
right.
when you're posting things on social media, and if you get trolls on there that say certain things,
right.
that could have a negative impact on you. Or if you, which I've done on the random occasion, go down a rabbit hole where you're like, oh, what a great story. And then 6 hours later, like, how many cat videos did I watch? And I did nothing productive.
It's true, right? And actually the fact that you did it for so long sparks in you an interest, whether you're aware of it or not, to do that again, right? Because in some way you've essentially created your own feedback loop for some sort of a reward addiction cycle that happens. And that's what the phone's designed to do. So really, the question really, 10 years old is too young to own a mobile phone. Essentially, how I interpret it is, what is the appropriate age to introduce a device that will most certainly adversely affect your child, but to the extent they can handle it, but simultaneously they benefit from having it because of the current climate with connectivity, right? And so I don't know the answer to that, but my instincts is that 10 is too young. My instincts is that 10 is too young.
I would think so too. I was going to go with, again, a teenager that would be in high school, 16 plus is where I would think that those social skills and the need to have a phone would make sense. Because when I had this pager, I was more mobile. So when I was 10, I wasn't going very far. I wasn't working. So at the age of like 16, I had a part-time job, and I was going to school, and I was going to volunteer, and I was also in the library when I lived out in Peel region. So mother trying to get a hold of me made complete sense. At 10, I'm outside playing rocks outside the house. She doesn't necessarily need to know where I am. So I think that, it's hard to say, but 10 is...
Well, it is, but actually you bring up a good point that I didn't even actually think about, which is because there has been such a decline in how much time is spent outside of the house unsupervised among children in the modern era, why do they really need that device if they're basically under your watch all the time, right?
Well, you can find my phone, right?
Yeah, so it's kind of peculiar in that way. But I think that the argument could be made, and this is a struggle. That's why I said I'm not happy about talking about this, because it elicits a lot of reactions from people.
Of course it would.
Because it involves children, essentially, and their children.
Their children,
right?
exactly. So we're not telling parents what to do by any stretch of the means.
So,
we're just having a conversation.
Absolutely.
Opinions
right?
only.
And I'm trying to bear out what I've heard from people who designed them and from what the research thus far, because it's still somewhat novel, the effects that it tends to have on their overall sense of self, their overall confusion about themselves and the world, their anxiety, the huge increase, right, in online bullying as a result of it, which has moved largely outside the classroom and onto there.
It's huge.
And the amazing, I would say probably at the point of pandemic levels of anxiety and depressive disorders and self-harm and suicide. And these are in some way connected, right? And so it's one of these things where I'm not saying again that I know the right age, but there is a trade-off. And I think that sometimes we underestimate exactly what we're risking or placing at stake for the trade-off of having kids not feel excluded because they're the only kid who doesn't have it. I'm not sure that it should be viewed as simply as that.
But there's other things that I know that kids have wanted, like, I want the newest G.I. Joe doll,
Totally.
and then you don't get it, and then you're still that kid, I didn't get the G.I. Joe doll. It happens.
It's true, but now that kids spend so little time outdoors, if they don't have a device at home, how do they have no friends? Right? So that's the problem, right? Like, that's why this is an impossible thing. Like, it's really difficult. I think that 10 is too young. But let's say you put restrictions on it, right? You can
For sure.
control a
Oh,
great
you
deal
totally
of
can.
things,
Just
right?
like you control the person's like Netflix profile. You totally can. So you
Yeah.
can control what's on the device. And I think when you talk about the pandemic,
Yeah.
oh, buddy, if we didn't have phones and internet access, that was the only way you could actually see people and
totally.
connect with them was through like video chats.
Totally.
And maybe kids wanted to do that. So maybe they were 10, they did have a phone because it was the only way you could connect with people because we were obviously in lockdown and we
Sure.
had to socially isolate in the bubbles that I was in, which was non-existent.
Mhm.
Thank God for the house party app. Okay,
Yeah,
'cause that's-
but even prior to that, that's still what they were doing, right? Like, a lot of kids basically just go to school. They use the internet to do work usually, or computers, because you have to in some sense, right? Because the academic institution demands it, because we live in 2022, right? It is what it is. But then they go home, and most of their time is spent either on devices or watching TV or on their phone or things like this. And it's like, okay, well, I'm not so sure that pre-pandemic life was really all that different when it comes to
I
some
was talking about myself because
children.
everything was closed. Like, I can't
Totally.
go shopping at Winners. I guess I'm going to be on my phone.
Yeah, so I guess maybe the question then, in some sense, need not be phrased that way if we wanted to have a more nuanced approach. Maybe the phone is not the problem. Maybe what is potentially on the phone is the issue. So maybe you could have it at 6 if the only thing that it could do is text your parents.
For sure.
Right? I mean,
At 6, you're texting your parents.
no,
Are
I'm
they
just
not in the
simply
house with
saying.
you?
I'm just.
Wow.
I throw out a
Bring
random.
me more Cheerios.
Yeah, I throw out a random, way too young age
Way
just to
too
make
young.
a point.
Are they even able to text? I think it also can stunt a
Mm-hmm.
10-year-old or any sort of a small child, possibly their sociability skills,
Mm.
by just being behind a computer or behind a phone the entire time. I think being out on the playground, playing with those rocks really helps you develop as opposed
it
to
does.
what happens with just being in front of a mobile phone and just like texting and speaking in only acronyms. IDK. Oh, stop. OMG.
Oh, I mean, yeah, that's a whole other thing, right? That is worthy of consideration, which I think in some sense points to how complex this issue is. And
Very
I
complex.
think the only thing that I'm happy or comfortable saying about this issue
Mm-hmm.
is that it's probably an impossible way. It's probably an impossible bar to set,
Mm-hmm.
right, about what the age would be, given all the confounding factors. But I think it's a decision that should be made with far more investigation involved into exactly what that thing does and the
Yeah.
effects is on your children prior to you making that decision. And I
For
think
sure.
right now it's usually made. I think it's usually being made on a matter of you don't want them to be excluded, which I get, but I don't think that's a good enough argument to just that alone to justify it, right?
For sure, it's every parent's
Yeah.
choice whether
Yeah.
they give their child a phone or not, and I'm sure that they would be doing that research, having obviously a phone themselves
Mm.
and knowing what a phone can do and what the restrictions are, or
Sure.
placing those restrictions. So,
Yeah, but I like what you said about usually you'd be outside like playing with rocks. I like you going back to playing with the rocks, but
the time.
They're my only friends.
exactly. I have patient faces on. Can you talk to me? My pet rock.
And so because in some sense, technology is very novel, right? And I mean, we've kind of developed into these animals that we are now after hundreds of thousands of years of contributing genetic material that relied heavily on the fact I can see your face
Mhm.
and I take feedback from when I say something, how you react to it. And I go, oh, did I say something good or funny or offensive or whatever? And the feedback I get from you in some way helps you socialize me as I socialize you.
Yes.
Right? And that is probably a necessary feature of normal development, right?
Yes.
But so if we substitute that because we think a technological substitution is a valid substitution in some sense for replacing regular social interaction, that's been the case for the entirety of human history and all of our predecessors up until 5 minutes ago, then I think that should be taken with a little bit more seriousness, right?
Yes.
In which way is that actually hindering development?
For sure, because I
Yeah.
can't really gauge your facial expressions and reactions behind the screen when I'm texting you. I
Exactly.
can't. And I normally will just text to have something very quick,
Mhm.
and then I'd rather talk to the person either on the phone or in person. But that is us being old school from a different generation where rocks were cool, right?
Well, I mean, I know how you put it that way, but I don't think it's a matter of old school. I think it's a matter of texting or emailing or messaging, things like that, is a transactional form.
ICQing and what?
Totally,
MSN
right?
Messenger.
But it reduces communication to a transaction, right? Or a matter
Yeah.
of turn taking. Like I do something, then you do something, and then I do something, and then you do something. Or we do it in order to achieve an effective outcome, which is I've conveyed a message to you, and I've received a message from you. Whereas communication among highly complex and sophisticated social animals like humans is way more complicated than that. It's an ongoing, organic thing that constantly has a feedback loop happening. And so, in some sense, texting, even video calls in some way, do not effectively substitute that, right? It reduces it to transactional or turn taking, which
Exactly.
is not real conversation.
It's not. That's why I'd rather talk to someone. But I find that this generation can be very, I'm okay to text you. No, I want to call you. No, just text me. Okay.
Well, it's easier to.
Because maybe they're multitasking. And I'm like, I don't have your undivided
They
attention
are.
because if you're texting, you're probably cooking, you're doing laundry, something else.
It's true.
So I'd rather, when I'm talking to someone, know that we are having a conversation together and there's no distraction. Ugh. That's why I was like, can you please hold? I got to send a text. I made sure I stopped talking to you, sent this real quick message because I had to, because I'm still working all over the place. Before I was like, oh yeah, Matt's talking to me. I'm like, oh yeah, that's great, Matt. Not listening to you because I'm texting, having multiple conversations.
Well, I mean, in a sense, it is a great boon for young people or even adults, but we're primarily talking about children.
People that are 10.
In some sense, it is a great boon for people that have natural social anxieties. Because now they can communicate without having the fear of being thrust into an uncontrollable social circumstance.
Right.
However, what I would say to that is that that's a Band-Aid, right? Because the treatment for that is overcoming it, because you can't live like a hermit the rest of your life.
Right.
And what you're supposed to do is actually get out there and do the difficult thing, which
it's a temporary solution.
It is. It's a Band-Aid that actually is probably going to cause people that have social anxiety to delay any progress they would make with immersing themselves or breaking free from the prison of their own anxiety.
Wow.
In a sense, by years, because instead they've been able to get by using their phone, right? And it's like, well, but don't you want to go out in the world with everyone else? And the answer is going to be, no, oh my God, I don't want to go out there. It's so terrifying. Anything can happen, right? And I get that.
Oh, man.
But by
Angry
the same,
Matt.
by the time I was like, that was like fearful or anxious.
Okay,
But yeah.
anxious Matt. Oh, like, where did he come from?
But I mean, and I get that, right? But by the same token, is that good for you at the end of the day, right? And I think that while it's a boon for people that have social anxieties, you're actually you're solidifying you're going to have it way longer, right, than you would otherwise, because you haven't deliberately made the attempt to step out of it.
Oh, wow.
So
we went down like many a different channel there.
we did.
And I feel like we can agree that maybe 10 is a little bit too young, but again, it's up to the parents to decide about having a mobile phone for their child, and that's up to the parents. But myself, if I was a parent, I would think this would be too young.
I think it would be too, but I mean, let's imagine we were for a second and be like, well, now I have a kid and I appreciate the context of my real child here, and it's like, well, all of a sudden is my decision going to change?
That's
and it
true.
might.
As they're like tugging at my sweater, I was like, Mommy, I need a phone. I need a phone. I was
Yeah.
like, okay, stop pulling my shirt off, right?
Yeah. So this is a tough one.
It is.
It's a tough one, but I think that 10's too young. But you know what? If I had a kid, maybe I could be easily changed, because all of a sudden it seems like a great idea.
At 6, I'm like, you want a phone at 6 so you can text me when you want your Cheerios? And I know, right? Things might change.
Yeah.
Hungry now. Because again, not even full sentences.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're going to take, I guess, a break right now, and then we'll be back with our last topic of the day as well as rapid fire. So we'll see you back.